So I just wanted to say welcome to everybody to today's webinar, Designing and Delivering Successful STEM Courses Online with the University of Waterloo. My name is Matthew Lasher. I'm the Field Marketing Manager for DigitalEd. So again, thank you all for attending. We're really excited to share this story with you guys. So the Faculty of Mathematics at the University of Waterloo has been delivering online courses for over 15 years. And with the challenge of teaching online courses due to COVID-19, we thought this was a really great opportunity to have the UW team share their experience and wisdom with other institutions who may be transitioning to online courses. So I'm just going to cover a few things off the top. This webinar will be recorded. We'll be sending you guys the link via email in the next few days. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. We'll get through as many as we can at the end of the webinar. And yeah, I guess I'll start with introductions. I'd like to introduce our University of Waterloo panelists for the webinar. Today we're joined by Dr. Stephen Farino, who's the Assistant Dean for Online Studies in the Faculty of Mathematics. Dr. Peter Wood, who is the Director of Mathematics, Business and Accounting Programs at University of Waterloo. And Professor Stephen Watt, the past Dean of the Faculty of Mathematics and Professor at the David R. Sheridan School of Computer Science. Serving as double duty as both panelists and moderators, we have Christina Perdikoulias, who is our president, and Jim Cooper, the CEO of DigitalEd. Thanks again to everybody for joining us, and I'll pass it off to you guys.
Great, thank you, Matthew. So I'd like to start the conversation right into it. Thank you for those introductions. And we'll start with some background on the why of online learning. So Professor Watt, I'll start with you. Can you please share with us your vision to move the University of Waterloo and their Faculty of Mathematics from exclusively face-to-face to remote online teaching? And what were you aiming to achieve in doing so?
Well, thank you for the question, Christina. The first thing to realize is that the University of Waterloo has been doing remote teaching for a long time. This is not something that's completely new. From its beginning, the University of Waterloo has recognized that education needs to fit in with careers in a number of different ways. So the cooperative education program, providing paid work-study experience, is one of Waterloo's hallmarks, as well as the continuing and distance education. That's been going on for decades with remote teaching. But with the rise of technology as an opportunity to have increasing capacity, this just seemed like an obvious way to steer our existing online education programs more into its mainstream. So we had some very specific objectives here. The first was to support math literacy in Canada and in Ontario, that there are a number of students who don't have access to adequate resources to feel comfortable with mathematics. So the University of Waterloo's developed a host of materials in order to support teachers and high school students to become comfortable with mathematics and to allow them to consider STEM careers that they might not otherwise be thinking of. A part of this is also so offering full courses for the high school curriculum, for the entire Ontario curriculum. And for 1 decade, we've been offering a continuing education online degree, a Master's of Mathematics for teachers. A second objective was to better support our own students with complex schedules and a host of different, an embarrassment of riches really, of all the different courses that you might see at a university. Students often have scheduling conflicts. And so even our students who are on campus, studying in degrees on campus in a given term, they like the ability to have online offerings so they can fit courses into their schedule they might not otherwise be able to take. But this is very standard. More recently, we've been thinking about expanding Waterloo's footprint. We want to have access to the very best students in the world. Not all of them are going to be coming to Canada, but we can reach out to them through online mechanisms. And finally, online technology is always increasing its capacities and what it can offer. And it's inevitable that the capacities offered by online education will eventually surpass many of the standard forms of teaching. And so we need to be in that game, we need to be leading that and not being caught by surprise and playing catch up. We need to future-proof our university.
So you're looking at a multifaceted approach to learning with an eye to global expansion and global view for all types of students.
That's right. So the providing support for students who might not have access to high quality resources for mathematics at a younger age, but also being able to present Waterloo mathematics to the world and to be able to reach into all corners to find the talent.
That's great. So I'll direct this next question to you, Dr. Perdikoulias. With being part of this for so many years as well, were there any lessons that you learned along the way that you wish you hadn't overlooked at the time, or perhaps you wish had focused a little bit more in those early stages of implementation?
So what mistakes did I make? We have only an hour, right? So in 2010, I was the inaugural author of the Masters of Mathematics for Teachers that Professor Watt has mentioned. It's an online-only professional master's degree for currently practicing high school teachers. I made a lot of mistakes, many of them quite predictable. On the production side, I assumed that digital assets could be built much faster than they can be built in reality. And I think a lot of people are learning that now as they prepare for remote teaching. On the cognitive science side, I was simply ignorant of the many learnings that were already known to cognitive scientists. On the pedagogy side, I made some egregiously bad assumptions about how long some tasks took students. I will say now we're in a much better place. We have better tools. Mobius has cut our production time in half and our maintenance time by about 90%. I know enough about design with assessment and activity in mind to design with that in mind from the beginning. And we have learning analytics capacity. I would say that my biggest lesson in that whole experience is that it's not what I do that is important as the instructor, it's what the learner does. So in designing my online assets now, I ask myself, how do I get students to do mathematics? How do I mark their work efficiently? What feedback can I provide to the students?
And that's almost from a continuous improvement perspective as well. As you put out one piece of material, what type of feedback do you get to improve it as it comes along as well?
Yes, we certainly intend to take an iterative approach, build assets now, have students interact with them, learn both from analytics and from student responses, what needs to be improved, and we continue to improve it and intend to continue to improve it.
So building on that experience, Dr. Wood and Jim, what do you feel are the key components in making online remote education as effective as, or potentially even more effective than traditional teaching methods? And what results have you seen in this area?
Well, I think Steve actually touched on this point that students really need to do math to learn math. I think we all know and have discovered just watching somebody write equations on the board is not a great way to learn. You have to answer a question, in many cases get it wrong, and then find out, I thought I understood this, what did I do wrong? And that's when the light bulb goes off and the understanding really happens. And you have to answer a lot of questions, not just one or two, hundreds really. And you think about grading 100, 200 responses from each student in a large class, you're not going to be able to do that. So having automated tools, online tools, that can ask a mathematically sophisticated question, get a sophisticated answer, and then provide feedback is extremely valuable to the students. Actually, this is what brought me interested in Mobius, is that the ability to ask a question. And also part of that is that when the student does get it wrong, they think, I thought I understood this. You know, what do I have this wrong? They're, on an online setting, they have the ability to go back to the lesson, replay the lesson, relearn, and they think, okay, now I really see what's going on. And I think that's one of the big advantages to online, is the ability for students to move through the content, not in this rigid linear way, but to be able to move back through, review material that they thought they understood and didn't.
So really allowing that feedback to the student to be front and center so that they can ensure and reinforce what they think they know at the time.
Yeah, there is that, people, they deceive themselves a lot. They watch a lecture and think, oh, I understand that. But you don't really know that you understand until you answer a question. And can I answer the question? That's when you really find out, did you really understand what you were taught?
And I would probably add to that, that I think it's critically important to understand that online digital course content is substantially different. Like course, it has the potential of being much more effective, but it probably needs a different design approach than traditional courses with static textbook based materials. The online platform provides a great deal of unique capabilities that are simply not available in these static materials. So you can easily blend formative assessment right into the course content, definitely unlimited drill and practice with immediate feedback to the students, sophisticated marking so that this both provides immediate feedback to the student, but also takes away a great deal of workload from the instructor itself. And I think maybe the highest thing is that we can actually understand the student's comprehension level during the learning process. It can actually be measured. And then, the analytics that the platform will provide will allow that material to be examined, like where are the learning breakdowns, how much time is being spent by the students, what are the roadblocks. So, we can deeply understand, much more than I think we've ever been able to before, just how effectively are we reaching students. We can measure the learning process itself and actually then correct anything which is suboptimal. So I think the platform is a unique experience. The course design, as Dr. Perdikoulias said, it's an iterative approach, but you can iterate based on data. You can actually measure how the material is being used, how effective it is, and correct it in the future based not just on what you feel or from student surveys, but actually on hard data that the platform provides. And I think that's critical in the online world versus the previous more courses with static course materials.
So to expand on that then, Dr. Wood, with such a broad scope, with very ambitious goals for the global expansion of an outreach of education from the mathematics perspective, and also having this idea of learning from the students and continuous iteration of the materials by design of the program itself, how were you able to maintain consistency and continuity across such a large faculty with all of these different competing goals?
Well, that's a good question. It's actually a challenge. It's something we're working on now. It's a big operation, and academics, they have good ideas, and sometimes they have their good own ideas. Some of the things that the university have done, I think we've done well, is we have what we call a Center for Extended Learning, CEL, which is a group of multimedia developers and instructional support type people who can help maintain some of that consistency and sort of course design and pedagogy so that the student experience is very similar across all of our classes. Recently, the math faculty formed what we call DAG, the Digital Assets Group, which is a group of dedicated lecturers, and their job is really to assist other instructors in building digital assets. So they're sort of experts in the construction of digital assets, and just having them as part of a team. We're trying to take a team approach to development, having these experienced people on the team. That definitely helps bring a consistency between the courses and the tools available to the students. I think also using a product like Mobius does in itself lend itself to some consistency. It's just sort of a framework. It's a template. You don't have everybody dashing off in different directions using 18 different technologies, because there's lots of technology solutions out there. But by adopting Mobius as our sort of platform of choice, that right there creates, sort of like, I don't want to say it's a template exactly, but it's sort of a framework that is now consistent. So then the students are having a similar experience between all of their classes. And we talked about the ability to ask questions, informative questions embedded right in the content. This is something we try to do in all of our courses. So the students this is how you learn. You learn by reviewing content and then doing the mathematics right there in the lesson. And that has worked out well for us.
Dr. Wood, the support groups you have, DAG and CEL, how many people do you have in those groups?
So the DAG group, we have currently 5 lecturers and 2 staff members and a co-op student. On the CEL side, that's actually a large group. They're involved not just in the development of courses, but also in offering them, exam support and things like that. They must have about 50 people. But I would say the core group involved in course creation, course development, has probably about 15 that we would draw on. That would include multimedia developers, online learning consultants, and anyone, quality assurance people, that type of thing, that are all involved in a course production.
I would definitely highlight this support group that you have, because we deal, as you know, with hundreds of universities, both in Europe and North America and Asia. And some are successfully making the transition to online, and other ones are simply, they're having a lot of trouble. And I find that the difference is the schools, the institutions that have support groups that help the professors in a consistent way move online, those are the ones who are being successful. In fact, if anything, they're finding it a better experience than previous. The ones who are letting their professors, instructors do it on their own, that is universally a horrible experience. So I do want to underline, I think this support group in helping develop digital materials, and as I think just from the size of the group, it's a heavy lift. There's a great deal of work to design a digital course and develop the materials. It's a much heavier lift than writing a textbook, where all you're doing is writing a question statically, versus having an interactive one. So yeah, I think one of the reasons for your outstanding success has been that you took the steps to put this support group in place.
Yeah, there's no question we benefited, especially in the COVID crisis, with the existence of that group beforehand. We saw a lot of instructors who were literally thrown into the fire. Like, you have to get your course online and you have 7 days, and they have never built an online course. Many of them had never even taken an online course, and they were completely at sea. So having these, essentially the DAG group operating almost as consultants, working with instructors to get them over that hump. These are the technologies, these are the tools, these are the things you want to focus on. These are the niceties you can, leave behind for now. Getting them started, it was a huge benefit for us, no question.
Yeah, and even understanding the different phases of online education. And as we know, definitely the testing and assessment and high stakes examination and interactive materials, that's, sort of stage 2, 3, 4. Many schools are struggling right now just doing synchronous Zoom lectures, and they think of that as online education and don't realize it's only the beginning, and it's not that effective, and there's better ways of doing it.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. One thing we emphasized right from the beginning is that as an instructor, you tend to focus on what am I doing as an instructor? What am I doing to deliver content? When you really want to focus on what are the students doing? What are they doing with the content, and how are they moving through it? And what are the questions they are doing? And just getting them to think in that mindset. Focus on the student activity, not your own activity. That's a big paradigm shift for a lot of instructors, but it makes all the difference.
Yeah, and really only the digital platform allows you to have even simple things like knowing how much time each student is spending on the materials. And as I think all three of you know, and we all know, there's a direct correlation between successful outcomes and time spent on the material. But you can now actually see that and have insights to how the material is being used. I think it's my turn to moderate, if that's correct. So now, as we touched on, in light of the COVID-19 situation and all schools instantly trying to move online, you truly, all three of you appeared farsighted at the least, and probably geniuses at the best. So, when you took the decision to move the Faculty of Math online, was the vision clear at the time? Now, Dr. Watt, you described, your goals, but with the luxury of hindsight, what would you do differently? And where do you see the areas of key improvement? So if you were starting fresh today and you had the resources and time, what would be the key points that you would see?
That's a great question. COVID didn't cause us to move online. COVID just accelerated something that was inevitable. I mean, it was clear that there was going to be like a phase change in the world, that there was going that the current trajectory of post-secondary education was going to hit some fundamental changes in the coming years, and so we were trying to prepare for this, and we got caught up a bit short. We thought we had more runway than we did, and so if we were to do something differently, it would be to do it more, faster, bigger, more aggressively at an earlier stage. I mean, we invested millions and millions of dollars in developing online courses and hiring high school teachers to come in and help prepare our outreach materials, and working things through the university governance process so that we actually could be offering online courses so that they were plug and play, absolutely equivalent in status and credit for the corresponding offline courses. And so that all took time. And you know, within a large organization, the wheels of change so don't all turn at the same speed. So if we had one thing to change, it would be to just put our foot on the gas harder, faster, with more gas sooner.
Let me add to what Professor Watt has said. Math has benefited from two deans who provided senior leadership and vision. And I think that makes an enormous difference. As he said, not everyone at universities moves at the same speed, and universities are inherently conservative beasts, and so we move slowly. Having the commitment from the top to experiment, to have funds, to consider opportunities. So when I think of Waterloo's commitment more than 10 years ago, some of it was really just about future-proofing. We had to worry about competition, as many of our institutions do, but it also allowed us to seize unexpected opportunities. So for example, we have a collaboration with a group of Indonesian universities. The intent was to dramatically expand the capacity in Indonesia in actuarial science. It's a large country, booming middle class, some very large government-sponsored insurance programs, but a complete lack of risk scientists. And so we were able to move on that by repurposing content, by having the people in place to build content. Some of our assets were as simple as translating from English into Bahasa, and because the mathematics and the symbols don't change, that was a relatively inexpensive way to seize an opportunity and to do a great social good. You know, we in some sense built an insurance policy for the unknown. We did not expect COVID-19.
We knew something would happen, but we didn't know what it would be.
Two follow-up questions, one short and one maybe a little bit more political. First off, have you seen any resistance from students about moving online, going from face-to-face to online?
So
No, go ahead, Steve.
About 9 years ago, the dean of the time, Dean Goulden, asked me to initiate some degree credit undergraduate courses to see how much pushback there would be from faculty members and from students. From faculty members, there was some concern by chairs that there would be no one interested, and that turned out to be not the case. Certainly not everyone, but there's enough of a coalition of the willing to build courses. For students, it's obvious they're voting with their feet. They register in the online sections in the hundreds. And
We
so
get complaints that we don't have an online section of a course.
Reddit is not kind to us when we don't have an online section.
Yeah, and not all professors are equally enthusiastic.
But we don't need them to be. We're large enough.
That's right. That's right. There are people who more than make up for it with their enthusiasm.
I will make a comment that we have seen. that previously there were pockets of resistance with every school that we moved or gave or sold the Mobius platform to. So there were, there is definitely support, through, I would say, the majority of instructors, but there were definitely pockets of resistance. I will say that since March, since the COVID-19 situation, that resistance has disappeared. I don't think there's any school on the planet that doesn't at least optionally want to be online. But my second, more political question, how do you see the broader future? I mean, today, especially in North America, many smaller brick and mortar schools are struggling as they see their tuition revenues potentially declining. There's limited budgets. But looking further out, do you see a future of education where there's potentially a smaller number of schools that are doing the remote education very, very well with a high reputation, and that they could potentially be the educators of the world? So like a handful of schools could potentially offer education to the best and brightest worldwide. I mean, is that how you potentially see the future, or do you see it some other way?
Have you been reading my diary, Jim? What we're seeing, this is very much along the lines of what we're seeing play out in the United Kingdom right now, where the enrollment caps on universities have been removed, and so certain universities have invested in infrastructure in order to take in more students. And so we have small universities or universities with a lesser reputation or who are in a financially difficult position, really worried whether they're going to be able to get the students that they want and sufficient to support their mission. It's clear that universities will be evolving. The competition amongst universities will be in new theaters. One theater will be the online theater. And I think this is one area where professors, lecturers, and university senior administration all agree that if we can place our resources in a way that provides the most effective learning experience for students, and everybody's a winner. That having certain tasks automated, even if we look at and it's quite obvious that Mobius and what's offered by DigitalEd already does that. But look even further into the future when we have teaching assistants that are automated, that are able to keep track of, this student understands these kinds of things easily or likes this kind of explanation, it really works for them. The idea of learner modeling being assisted by computers to help instructors be able to provide the experience that you would get in a small tutoring group, but to a larger class, for the system to be able to direct the instructor as to who's having trouble with what, as opposed to simply providing them a grade book. And so that's something that we can look forward to as digital education evolves. We can already provide some of this kind of thing with the online analytics that we're getting in real time from the student experience. But there's no ceiling to where that can go. And that's going to be the theater where the universities are competing with each other in the future, I think, in order to be most effective at delivering the best education to the students.
So let me add one data point and one cautionary point. The data point, Jim, you asked, will we see differences in behaviors among students or universities? So the University of Waterloo is just at the point of receiving its confirmations for students wishing to enroll at the university for the fall term. Our normal target in the Faculty of Mathematics is about 1,200 students entering to study mathematics in the fall term. I don't think I'm permitted to tell you the numbers that we have confirmed to the university for fall 2020, but we're more than twice our past targets. And some of that is simply because students acknowledge that they can study online and they want to study online at a university like the University of Waterloo.
And we were ready.
And we were ready. and we were ready.
And to be clear, these are mainly online courses, like so without the campus experience and face-to-face components.
Correct, correct. The cautionary note is that we can't underestimate the importance of the social experience in education. Humans are social by nature. And so though we've done, I think, a really good job at content and questions, assessment and structure, design, I think we need to find some way to make the human experience of learning better in online courses. And I think we haven't got there yet. And I think for lots of people, I think of a 17 or 18-year-old arriving on campus, there's a whole set of experiences that are available to them that are not yet available online. And I think that many faculty would say that one of the things that they miss about teaching online is that human interaction. And we have ways to answer questions, discussion boards and other tools. I think we need to do a better job on the human side.
You mentioned future proofing. And now that you have, relatively quickly and definitely accelerated moving a large number of courses completely online, what are you doing now to future-proof, 3 years out? And what advice would you give to the people listening to this webinar of how they should future-proof their institution?
Let me be honest. I think for the last 2 months, it's been much more about survival in the present than future-proofing for the next decade or generation. The fact that we can move several hundred mathematics courses online, I think is testament to good decision-making in the past. So right now, I think is a survival time, consolidation time. I think the next step will be careful reflection on what we did, what worked, what didn't work, begin the iterative process, and make sure we can design at scale in the future.
Professor Wood, do you have anything to add? You're at the leading edge, the sharp edge of actually putting these courses online.
So yes, certainly very busy putting courses online. And I think it might be worthwhile pointing out that we named our group the Digital Assets Group, not the online group, because we really see these digital assets as helping the in-class experience. I don't think our goal was ever to close the campus as a physical location and only deliver digital assets to people in remote, they'll learn all by themselves. The campus experience is very important. And we see these tools, these digital tools, as enhancing that, not replacing them. I think it's very different that way. And looking forward, I don't think universities are not going to go away. You're still going to have classes, but I think we're just going to approach education differently, maybe more efficiently, maybe more tailored to diverse backgrounds. We see a lot of students coming from very different backgrounds, very different levels of preparation. And it can be very hard to address that one-on-one, but with appropriate digital tools where you can have, as Stephen mentioned, the sort of self-directed learning in some sense. You can react to students' background, their abilities, direct them to the resources they need. So it's really all about enhancing education. I don't think it's really about replacing the university experience.
Well, maybe let's drill a little bit deeper on that. So all three of you, I mean, what, if you needed to bullet items that digital tools help, like for example, maybe taking away the burden of marking, papers over and over again, and it frees up more time for non-digital or non-remote activities. What would those bullets be? Like, what are the key things that you think should be sort of in an online remote environment, and what should you be making more time for in a face-to-face direct connection with students? Like, yeah, how would you characterize those two lists of items?
Well, before digging into this, I understand that I'm breaking panel protocol here, Jim, but before moving on to that question, I'd like to sort of add something to your previous question, which was about, what are the flanks that we should be looking at now? And I think that whereas we had recognized that there was going to be some shakeout in the post-secondary sector and that we needed to be prepared, I think that another phase change that we need to keep an eye on is the whole nature of credentialing in the future. That with other sources of online credentialing that provide informal courses, that this will be blurring the nature of qualifications in the future. And so we need to make a very clear beachhead for what is a university degree, what is the authority that supports these qualifications and stands behind them, versus what are the micro-credentials that you can offer to show that you've paid attention to something and that you're on top, that you're interested in a subject and that you've got some skills in that subject. And there'll be a spectrum of continuity between those. And the universities will not forever have a monopoly. We've seen things like corporate certifications for different types of engineering tasks and so on. And so we need to understand how the digital assets that are used for university level courses also will lead into professional continuing education. And I see that as being a next area that will have significant changes, whether it's 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, next week, we don't know. Probably not next week. We're still working on Thursday. So sorry to sort of interpolate in your last question, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't miss this entire big picture.
That's actually a good point. When you think about education, we've been talking about undergrad education, essentially for 18, 19-year-olds, their first experience in higher ed, they're looking for that first job. But there is this whole different sphere, as Stephen talked about. These are mature people who are actually looking for their third job or their fourth job and interested in whether it's retraining, certification, and so forth. So you're going to approach that differently, but it's largely the same type of digital tool you would need in order to deliver it.
Yeah, definitely continuous education, I think, is definitely the way of the future. One thing I wanted to touch on before we leave the point too, is because I think people don't think about it enough, especially when they're developing their academic continuity plan and future proofing and planning for the future, is very boring things like will the server stay up? Are you protecting your student data? Like there's so many ways that this can go wrong. So Christina, I know you're leading this within DigitalEd. Can you make some comments on the general approach to academic continuity planning?
Absolutely. And yes, it is the boring part of it. So I definitely don't want to keep everyone from that perspective, but it's a critical piece. I think that when you're looking at what experience you're going to deliver to your students, nothing turns them off more than having something more aged than what's on their phone. So how are you going to make sure that they're still engaged and learning without having technology get in the way? There's a conversation from software design on that side and user experience, but just looking at it from the perspective of how do we make sure that the variability of students coming on sometimes middle of the night, sometimes in the morning, sometimes all at once, depending on how a professor wants them to learn, if it's asynchronous or if it's from a synchronous mode. That back end needs to be able to support the lift and the pull and all the different dynamic variations. It's super tempting to just build it as big as you'll ever need it and right size it for the most extreme case. But we all know that there's budgets associated with that, and that's very hard to do, to put yourself in the position to just build something as big as you'll ever need it and hope that you'll hit that high watermark. So from the perspective of academic continuity, you need to know that those lights will be on, that uptime is there so that the professor can rely on the material they're delivering rather than, oh gosh, now I can't get them back on that system and have to figure out another way to get around with something more static.
Okay, I think I want to, I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to try to make some time for the chat questions, which have come in at quite a flow rate. Maybe start with you, Christina, but for all four of you. How do you see the future of online remote education? What are the key items that you think would be in the future and things we should be thinking about now?
I think it's critical to touch on some of the points that were already said by some of the panelists, that we look at the centering the student in the center. So the technology that's being provided and delivered to the student really needs to look at them as meeting them where they are. What is their level of knowledge? How do we gauge where they are? And how do we then provide the right tools to guide them to where they want to be? That's where technology is going. If you look at it as a market, the new entrants into education technology are really looking at this as a way to personalize the student's perspective of education and get them to where they want to be. That touches on micro-credentialing. What level of education do they want to get to? And is it enough to get the skills from a technical perspective so that they can get that next role, whether it's a professional career or if it's personal? Or if they are looking at it as a stepping stone to get into another more formalized level of education. That ability to specialize and personalize per learner is where education is going. What online allows that to happen without having many personalized tutors face-to-face with the student.
And to take one course from Cambridge and one course from Waterloo and one course from Caltech, yeah, it's a very, could be an exciting future. There's
absolutely.
In the order of my screen, I'm going to start with Professor Wood. Yeah, your concept or your views on the future of online education.
Certainly, I think recently there's suddenly an acceptance that online education can work, where maybe even 6 months ago, there was maybe less certainty. I think students, now that they're all doing it, certainly the feedback we're getting in our courses is that it actually works for them. Some of the students who maybe wouldn't have tried it in the past are now saying, hey, this is a learning experience that works for me. Also same with instructors who previously were not so sure if they wanted to get into this online world, or suddenly saying, hey, there's things I can do that I couldn't have done before, and it really makes them rethink the way they teach. And I think that's the future. It's going to be changing the way we think about teaching. Christina talked about meeting the students where they are and this sort of personalized learning, but there are other aspects, I think, that online is just it's opening up opportunities that weren't there before, both in terms of volume. You can certainly reach more students all over the world, but also in quality. You can have the students learn the foundational material more independently. So as an instructor, I can start thinking about these higher level learning outcomes. I start thinking about why we're attacking this problem really at all, or why this way. And I think that's the big change we can see in education.
Okay, and moving ahead, Dr. Watt, and I do, also, please expand on areas of education which are not applicable to online. Like I realize we're very focused on STEM topics for what we do, but there are other, do you feel that there are items that need to be done face-to-face? And also to talk about, proctoring and high stakes examinations in a remote online mode. So yes, the future of education in its entirety.
Oh, well, that's a broad question, Jim. There are a couple of aspects. One is what kinds of things need to be taught face-to-face or hands-on. I would prefer not to have my next surgery done by someone who had only done online courses without access to sort of direct experience supervised by someone who'd done it before. And so there'll be a number of subjects like this. There'll be others which involve direct person-to-person interaction, like some certain seminar courses which are all about the student interactions, we don't have the best support for that kind of thing today. And there's certain kinds of grading that have to do with measuring how well someone expresses their opinions in an argued essay. Now that's beyond the scope of what DigitalEd does today. But there are other directions that we need to keep a close eye on. And that is, for different subjects, we have different, for different areas, we have different degrees of self-motivation and attention span and engagement. I think we need to pay very close attention to how the students remain engaged. When MOOCs were first introduced, it was looked as there would be a tidal wave that would take over education, but the students, the number of students who sign up at the beginning compared to the number who complete the course is a huge difference. And so right now, one of the main areas will be the psychology of continued engagement, and for software tools, for example, to detect when a student is starting to lose interest and when it needs to shake it up and present things in a different way, just to provide some different some variation. So it's not like a monotone drone that where you'll fall asleep in a lecture. One needs to do the same kind of analogous thing in the digital world, and then provide some, we need some studies on what keeps a student engaged in an online process and how that varies from subject to subject. And finally, there'll be the nature of what kinds of communities transport into the digital realm. So one of the things one of the reasons people attend university is to be part of a community. And whether that's to say, well, I attended XXX university, or this was my group of freshman buddies, we always studied together, and now 40 years later, we're still on Facebook, or getting together once a year in Muskoka or something. And so an important area will be to understand what kinds of students are susceptible to digital placemaking and digital community building. And that will be an important part. And some students, it's all about the human interaction, and other students, it's all about the material they learn. And so that will vary from subject to subject.
Okay, thank you. So Professor Perdikoulias, big finish before we go to the online questions. But one, I do want to see your general views on the future of online education. But I also want to ask, do you feel that the current materials that University of Waterloo is serving up, are you better serving both the advanced student as well as the student which is struggling? Has that helped you at all to broaden your educational net to people that are learning quickly versus people that are struggling a bit more?
So let me answer that question as part of the general answer. My first observation would be that people are implicitly framing, most frequently, the question about online as degree credit courses. And I think at Waterloo and perhaps at other places, a focus on digital assets as opposed to courses is actually probably more valuable, because those digital assets can be used in classrooms, they can be used by students on their own, they can be used as a textbook replacement. So to your question about students in different places and different interests, if we think of the set of digital assets that's available to them, rather than they must do this course in this prescribed way, I think there's real opportunity there, especially since we can now apply empirical tests from cognitive science to the content and the students' interaction with the content, and we can get better at teaching and learning iteratively. Second general remark would be that there's real opportunities available online that are not available to us physically. I gave one example of our relationship with universities in Indonesia, but we are now considering a number of broader relationships that would simply not have been available to us for a number of reasons: cost, physical proximity, that we can do online, and they can be either by courses or by some interaction with digital assets. A third would point, just to emphasize what Peter said, volume. We are taking in a whole lot more students this year than we have in the past. The students know that they will be studying online, and we can scale that relatively easily. So I think being able to deal with large changes in volume will become important for lots of educational institutions, from grade school to graduate school. The last thing I think is we can, and again, this just reiterates Peter's point, we can make a significant change in quality. So when I think of the very expensive time of a faculty member with students, if we can make that time as valuable and as constructive as possible, that might mean students do some learning in advance, some review in advance, some independent assessment, but where we can go from, here's a statement of the fundamental theorem of calculus, which all of us would cover in a Calc 1 course, to why does it work? Let's think about how this historically evolved, which is different from the way most of us teach it. Why did it evolve that way? What if you modify the conditions that put a higher order of thinking demand on that interaction between teacher and student? But to do that, we have to free up time and energy. And so the teacher should not be thinking about, how do I fix this server problem? How do I mark the work of N hundred students quickly? And so we need to make their lives easier. So.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Matt, we're running out of time, so I'm going to turn it over to you. Hopefully we can hit as many of the online questions as we can get to.
Sure thing. Yeah, we've had a number of questions come through, so thanks everyone for sharing with us. I don't think we're going to get to every single one, but I've tried to group them kind of as best I can. One of the big things I'm seeing everybody kind of asking questions about seems to be focused around humanizing and socializing online courses, and kind of feeding the need for students for that social interaction, and making it feel like they're not just learning through a metal device in front of them. Do you guys have any takes on that, on how best you can humanize or socialize those courses? And I know, Jim, you spoke about this recently, so yeah, I'm interested in hearing your takes.
Well, I could jump in with an observation. I have a teenage daughter, and she views her life as having a digital side and a face-to-face side. And so for her online social contacts are as important as her face-to-face contacts. These are overlapping circles, of course, but this is a very important side to develop. And just as the digital assets are not used solely in distance education, they can be used as support for classroom education, where one has some motivation for the students to do their pre-readings, because grades are associated to them. As I mentioned earlier in a previous answer, getting the mechanisms for social connection related to whether it's to subjects of study, similar motivations for studying, similar background and so on, but support for community building, I think is going to be important for the long-term success. But for the short term, we've all had a quick lesson in online socialization through online socializing through COVID-19.
Any other comments?
Yeah. So another big one we had, kind of a theme with a number of questions here, was based around academic integrity and proctoring through these online exams. With a lot of people getting pushed very quickly, through COVID, it's been a big theme. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think I can start the conversation on this one. It's an issue that everyone wants to look at. We definitely want to make sure that whatever you do with testing and assessment, that from an online and a remote perspective, that academic integrity is maintained throughout it. So whether you use some built-in tools to make sure proctoring type tools where you're not moving into other parts of a browser because it is a web-based tool. That's one element, but we've also looked at opportunities to partner with companies that do this exclusively, and they have wonderful capabilities that enable online proctoring to maintain that. Because the difficulty is students can just copy and paste one element, go into another browser, look for the answer, and part of being able to create algorithmically generated questions, there is some safety in that you're not going to find the same answer somewhere else on the web that's been generated in the same way because it's created on the fly. But even being able to have that protection and that extra element to know that the student that is writing this exam online is the person that's actually on the other end of that screen, that is something that takes a lot more technology. And there's some wonderful elements coming out when you look at more specific things like biometrics that may be a little bit more advanced for today and do have privacy concerns that we need to take care of. There are a lot of tools out there that help support that, and we partner with them and have some of our own just to help from some elements.
Professor Perdikoulias, I know that you have a history in investigating cheating within the math department at Waterloo. Do you feel that the situation with remote is better, worse, the same? Yeah, how would you characterize it?
So for everyone to know, I was formerly the Associate Dean in the Faculty of Mathematics and responsible for academic integrity violations. And I would say the first point is that not all of our colleagues believe that academic integrity violations occur. And I think we should simply assume that they do, that they will. And we have to determine how much effort we want to put into detection, prosecution, and suppression, where that's worth it and not worth it, and what relatively straightforward and simple things we can do to minimize the incentive and the opportunity. But we should certainly not ignore that it happens. So simple things, having students sign as part of their assessment activity an academic integrity statement helps. That's been our experience. Not uniformly, but it does help. Randomizing questions helps. Establishing assessments so that students see that they are making progress reduces the incentive to say, I need to get 90% on this 60% final. And the only way I can do that is to hire Jim Cooper to write my exam.
That would not help.
Then there is, we do have to follow up and prosecute folks. Waterloo still makes heavy use of invigilated exams. We do expect students to write in a proctored setting. This spring term is the first term in the university's history when we don't have that in place. And so the anxiety factor is pretty high. One of the things that we've landed on, and we'll certainly assess it at the end of the term, is that we have much more regular assessments, but of lesser weight. And so that students don't have that incentive to hire someone or cheat on a heavily weighted final assessment. Peter, anything to add?
So yeah, it is an issue. There's no question about it, and it's hard. One of the techniques that we've had some success with is with good assessment design. I think I said earlier on in the webinar that thinking about what the students are going to do and building these activities should be the focus. But I made it sound easy. Just go do these things and it'll be fine. It's actually quite hard, and there are ways to design final assessments that aren't very simple, low-level calculations that you could, as you say, cheat and just go on the web and go to Maple or something, say, how do I do this simple calculation? And it does it for me. But you start testing sort of higher-level cognitive skills that you just can't Google. And by using randomization, and it is surprising, if you spend some time and really think about it, you can generate algorithmic questions that test higher-level learning skills, not just would change the number from a 3 to a 4, but it's otherwise an identical calculation. So if you put the effort into thinking about the assessments, the assessment structure, that can help. I agree with Steve, you can't eliminate it. It's something that there are people, dedicated cheaters, and they're tough to deal with. But I think the opportunistic ones, we can address those, and that's the bulk of them.
I would like to add to or emphasize what Peter said. Design of assessments. Many of us who teach leave the design of assessments and our actual assessments sometimes to the night before they're supposed to be posted. And when we build the assets digitally in advance, if we build assessment into the design, I found that goes a long way to structuring content for students so they feel less pressure to cheat because they can do some form of assessment as they go. So thinking about assessments up front instead of at the tail end helps.
Excellent. So I have a question here from Laura. Thanks, Laura, for the question. She mentioned, how does your student retainment in math online courses compare with that of in-person courses? And how does the student learning performance compare? Do you have any ideas on those? I believe Dr. Perdikoulias, you might be.
We have lots on both. We track our students pretty carefully, and we've built a set of data dashboards to monitor the performance of students longitudinally if they've taken an online course. As part of the setting, most of our students take both online courses and on-campus courses, and the institution treats them identically. So our question is, if you take an online course, are you as well prepared for the future, at least as well prepared for the future, as if you take an on-campus course? And the evidence across many thousands of enrollments and many hundreds of sections is, yes, you are as well prepared. We've done analysis of what we call our core and service courses, the 10 math courses that every math student must take. The Department of Statistics has done its own analysis of stats courses, and the analysis is pretty consistent that we can't find any material difference. There are at some times very dramatic changes, but they're often tied to a specific instructor or a specific new approach. But on average, we have not found a material difference between students taking linear algebra online and linear algebra face-to-face.
I can maybe just add a little to that. As Steve says, we do track this, and there have been cases. Building online digital assets, this is hard. It's not something you just throw together quickly, as all of our colleagues are discovering, and building good ones is harder still. And sometimes we don't get it right the first time. It is an iterative process, and this is something I emphasize with my team, that, okay, we're going to do this. This is our first go through this course. We're going to see how it works, and we're going to expect to have to iterate based on experience. And there have been cases where we'd launch a course, we'd look at the results and think, okay, this didn't work very well. Let's go back to the course design and see where we can make improvements. And that has happened. We've rebuilt some courses and saw a fairly significant improvement in student outcomes based on those improvements. So it is an iterative process, and it's not easy.
I want to emphasize that sometimes when we build things, just as often as they don't work as well as we think the first time, sometimes we hit home runs. And we see real significant sustained improvements in retention and student learning and in performance in subsequent courses. And certainly one course where we invested a lot of time that way was Calculus for Science, and that was a home run.
Awesome. We still have a number of people with us. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we can wrap this up. But another theme here in the Q&A was based around analytics and kind of, what do you guys see as being the most helpful, whether it's supporting students, supporting teachers, and just kind of like how you use analytics to kind of direct, your online offerings.
So we're in the early stages of using the analytics. We do get, I'll call it click level data on what the students are doing and how they're interacting with the components. And I guess as Steve mentioned a minute ago, sometimes we build something that we think will be really engaging and we discover the students just aren't using it. And then we can go back to that component and see what we did wrong, essentially. We're learning lots of interesting things. Certainly students want to do questions. That's actually what they want to do. We did one analysis with a particular course that we looked at what was the very first thing the students did when they logged onto the course the very first time. And they had zero course content. There was no textbook, associated textbook. All the course content was in Mobius. And over half the class, the first thing they did is go to some of the questions to see, can I do these right now? That's what they want to do. They want to be able to test their own knowledge and see what they can do. I mentioned we have 2 staff members in our digital assets group. One of them is a data scientist that's his job, is to go through this data and look for the trends and do that analysis for us. We're still in the early stages, but I would say the biggest use we're getting out of that data now is exactly how the students are using these assets, which ones are spending the most time on, and which ones just don't appear to work.
There's also the direction as to where to take this in the future. That so we can see what pages students spend their time on, what areas they go back and they read again and again to try to understand things. And so that tells us what parts of a course could be enhanced for the student's benefit. We can also correlate how long they spent on which sections and how well they did in the evaluation. And we can also correlate subject to subject. And so we're still in a data collection phase for this. But just as, for example, online translation became a reality when you had parallel texts of the same material from, let's say, parliamentary records and so on. As we gather more data, we'll be able to correlate how different subjects are learned by students either in a covariant way or contravariant way, and to be able to understand, to be able to construct dynamically individual pathways through material. And lastly, these kinds of analytics could be personal checkout data of students themselves to allow themselves to provide some sort of certification that they have been able to achieve this kind of result in this course at a much finer grained way than here's one number, 72%. That actually they're really great on Laplace and Fourier transforms and solving open boundary value problems and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they can present this as an achievement. And so and for self-knowledge as students, if they want to understand how do they compare to the other students in the class, what are the areas where they are doing better than their peers, what are the areas that they might want to spend more time studying.
Well, I think that's it today too. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. I've added my email address into the chat there. If you guys have any questions about the webinar or about the Mobius platform itself, please don't hesitate to reach out. mlasher@digitaled.com. I'd love to chat with all of you. Thank you all for attending. Thank you to Dr. Farino, Dr. Watt, and Dr. Wood, as well as Jim and Christina for speaking with us today. And have a good day. Thanks so much.
Okay,
Thanks
thank you.
very much.
Bye, everyone.
You're all.